The universe sometimes generates wonderful coincidences, and in the manner of all coincidences, they never cease to surprise me in particular. And this coincidence in particular deals with a notion that I was looking through my LinkedIn feed the other day, and lo and behold, up popped a talking head predicting where the market was going to go next year, even down to the month of when it was actually going to do something. The intriguing thing about these predictions is the psychology around them, particularly the psychology of no shame, because this particular punter in general had always been incorrect, but that didn't seem to worry him in the slightest. Now, where the coincidence comes in is I'm actually in the process of rereading Thinking Fast and Slow by the Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman. And I've actually just snipped out this quote. And I'll read this quote to you because it's actually very informative and it forms the basis about what I'm going to talk about. And he says, "You build the best possible story from the information available to you. And if it is a good story, you believe it. Paradoxically, it is easier to construct a coherent story when you know little, when there are fewer pieces to fit into the puzzle. Our comforting conviction that the world makes sense rests on a secure foundation. Our almost unlimited ability to ignore our ignorance." And this is the intriguing thing about those who make predictions about markets. I could say that they are the archetype of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but that would probably be being a little bit kind to them. They have what I would call boundless ignorance. And I don't know whether they're aware of their ignorance or not, whether they simply choose to dismiss it. And so we come back to this notion of clowns. And to be honest, I will throw into this mix certain members of the technical analysis church. That is, people who believe in Gann, people who believe in Elliott Wave, astrologers, sunspots, all that sort of nonsense. Since they are guilty of the same issue, they are unaware of their own ignorance, but they're also unaware of their own arrogance in attempting to predict essentially the unpredictable. Traders exist in sort of glorious uncertainty, and we actually have to exist in this state of uncertainty, because without uncertainty there is no risk. If there is no risk, there is no potential for profit. As I am fond of saying, I can give you a perfectly risk-free trade, but for that trade you will make no return. You don't deserve a return. You deserve no return because you've not taken on any risk. This is the nexus of the relationship that the trader has with markets. You must exist in uncertainty. You must learn to navigate that uncertainty. But you do so because you accept that it is the uncertainty that brings risk. But for me, the cornerstone of this acceptance is this phrase. It is the notion of humility, of understanding and accepting that there are things that you do not know and that your knowledge is imperfect. And it's imperfect because we do not have access to infinite time, infinite cognitive ability, and perfect information. Everything is a compromise. This phrase, I believe, and I may be wrong, I first heard used here in Talib's book, The Black Swan. This is actually worth adding to your library, if only for the notion of understanding how uncertainty rules our lives and how, in particular, uncertainty rules the lives of traders. And so when we're confronted with something like this, we're literally confronted with a map of uncertainty. And we have to try and do something with this, to contextualize this in some way, shape or form, to generate a coherent decision. But the very basis of this is that without context and without us understanding or accepting that we can't understand everything that is being presented to us, we run into a problem. And the problem is a very simple one. The relationship that you and I have with the market is completely asymmetric. And by that I mean that the market's opinion is the only one that counts. Our opinion might be one of millions and is therefore largely irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. The market will always know everything and formulate its direction based upon the presumption of knowing everything. We can only know little bits. So the trading of any instrument requires us to accept asymmetry, but also to be better thinkers and to understand that we need an evidence-based approach to trading. Unfortunately, most traders are not aware of this asymmetry, and they fall victim to this sort of what I call a sense of tribal conformity. This is a chart of AMP. You'll see that I've highlighted two blocks. The first is simply a reference block, because I can guarantee you there are people who bought AMP at this price, somewhere in its history, who are still holding it today when it's lost probably 75% of its value. Such traders who are caught in this problem generally tend to lack humility. They don't understand that there are views other than their own, and that the market may accept that view other than yours and present that to you in the form of price action. It is this lack of humility that is probably at the core of the majority of catastrophic errors made by traders. On the bottom of this chart, I've plotted volume. You can see that there are an almost infinite number of opportunities that an individual trader could get out of this position. But they choose not to because they're wedded to their story. Their story in some way speaks to them, and they believe that their story is correct, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Again, we come back to this notion of lacking humility. And what they're doing is they're falling into the trap of weighting the knowledge they have much more heavily than knowledge that is out there in the market. So they believe their own story is superior to the market's story, and that eventually everyone will come to see the world the way they do. Unfortunately, that sort of turning of the market's view may either never happen or might take decades. There is this notion of variant perception. There are opinions other than your own, and these opinions might carry more weight than yours, because the market's opinion certainly carries more weight than yours. This notion of variant perception is a phrase a friend of mine, David Chia, as a fund manager, uses. And it is this notion of thinking about what other opinions might be. What might be out there in the marketplace that you are either unaware of or don't weight at all. So we have to be immensely suspicious of our own behaviours. At its core, trading is a psychological endeavour. Your success as a trader hangs on the notion of how well you control your own behaviour and how self-aware you are. The problem you have is that humans, by and large, are very, very poor judges of our own behaviours. We're very poor at holding a mirror to ourselves because at our very core, we're simply hairless apes who like to stand around a campfire and swap stories. We love stories. Stories carry weight for us. We're not very good with data at all. For example, if you ask someone why they hold a particular share, what you'll generally get is some long-winded explanation of how good it is and why it is so good. A perceptive trader will simply say to you, I hold it because the price is going up. The implication being that they will no longer hold it when the price stops going up and starts going down. It's a very simple binary decision. There is no need to try and force the current circumstances into your narrative, to somehow mold your narrative. And you see this with even technicians. And I'll hark back to the Gann and Elliott wave people. Particularly Elliott wave people are wonderful at making these sort of post-dictive pronouncements about why they were wrong. You know, it generally wasn't the third wave of the fourth conjunction with Uranus being in constipation. It was actually the fourth wave of the third wave. Uranus wasn't in constipation. This is post-dictive nonsense. Perceptive traders admit that they are the worst judges of their own performance and the worst judges of their own psychology, which is why we have rules. And whilst we like to think of ourselves as wonderfully logical machines, we have to be careful that we don't fall into what has been termed Descartes' error, and that is the notion of this split between reason and emotion. Even very good traders accept that there is emotion sometimes in their decisions, and they work around this. They have little rules that assist with this as a problem. But this is something you have to learn. It's not easy. It is difficult to learn to be a logical thinker. To give you an example from my own past, when I first arrived at university, I did not know how to read a paper like this. And nobody is born knowing how to read these sorts of papers. You actually have to learn. You actually have to sit down and build a checklist. And even now, when I go through academic papers, I still have the same checklist that I built. Otherwise, these would be incomprehensible to most people. They're even incomprehensible to a lot of people within the field they address, because they don't have a checklist. But at the end of the day, traders have to accept that all we have is conjecture, all we have is theory, all we have is opinion. The market's opinion is the only opinion that counts. And if we get caught up in our boundless ignorance, not actually understanding that and understanding the smallness of ourselves and our opinions, then any bet we make is bound to be hamstrung by not only our inability to be humble and our poor decision making, but more importantly, our own inability to recognize when we've made a mistake.